Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes, and I am delighted to be here in the studio with Marina Milosev. I know Marina because she posted on LinkedIn about the London Legacy Development Corporation's handbook, Creating Places That Work for Women and Girls. I was super curious to know more. I'm here on Gubbi Gubbi country in Caboolture in Queensland, and Marina, you are not in Queensland or Australia. Whereabouts are you based?
Thanks a lot for having me. I am based in London. Yeah, absolutely right about the handbook, something that I have prepared for London, but really applicable for the rest of the world.
How did you become interested in places that work for women and girls? What made you interested in creating these spaces?
It's a universal problem. I think social injustice and gender inequality is something that is really felt across the world, unfortunately, often to a higher degree. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle and you do believe like you're better off. But actually, when you start digging and when you're looking at the statistics, and also not just the statistic, but if you're facing your own experience, I think we all can still agree, unfortunately, we have not, reached equality that is needed. Again, UN Women reminded us recently, saying that it's going to take us 280 years to achieve gender equality across all of the sectors for advancing the topic at this pace. And I think for me, that was an awakening moment because I felt I don't have 280 years. I only have maybe another 20, 30 years where I'll be professionally active. So what is really that I can do today, in a very kind of like a noble and a small way, contribute to this important topic, which is something that I've personally always been very passionate about. I'm coming from Serbia, so coming from a country that does struggle with many social issues. So I've experienced firsthand what it really means to be marginalized, and particularly being a woman in a country where there is a lot of conflict. It is really hard. I'm a landscape architect and urban planner, just a little bit for the background. And I've been really lucky to be working for an incredible organization called London Legacy Development Corporation. We are actually a public body, so we are a mayoral development organization set in 2012 to deliver regeneration of the Olympics. Why I think this is really important for the topic is because from the very beginning, we have been committed first to delivering the most inclusive games, but then that really reflected to designing the places and creating this new whole town in London post the Olympics through the regeneration, where truly creating inclusive environment have been at the very heart of every decision that we have taken as an organization. So that really helped. One of the things that I actually realized when I started looking into this topic is that despite inclusive design these days in developed countries, at least, and I can speak for the UK, and I also lived and worked and studied in Spain, so I can say the Western world, when it comes to inclusive design, I think we have advanced this topic to some extent where it is being mainstreamed. However, what I found is that often when we're talking about inclusivity, it is narrowly defined as addressing disability. And I think we still have a lot more to learn. This really fails to fully encompass other aspects, including gender. What happened in the UK in 2021, following heightened media scrutiny of several unfortunate tragic events, public attention once again focused on the issue of male violence against women. It's 100 years overdue topic, so 2021 we're already late to be thinking about this, but it's unfortunate events that really face us with the reality and made many organizations, including LLDC, to start rethinking what is in our capacity that we can do to advance the topic. And this is where this project landed with me, obviously having the background, but I did quite a lot of research and always been interested in innovative research in urban design and planning. I did quite a lot of work on nighttime economy. That is how I got to actually start rethinking this whole topic.
The idea of inclusivity inclusivity. And I know that a lot of women's spaces, when they talk about making it good for women, they talk about safety, which again is a very, very narrow focus. So if I've got this right, what you're saying is, how do we make it so it's a place that is pleasant and enjoyable, that you want to go to, not that it's not feeling awful, but that it actually feels really lovely to be there?
Absolutely. I'm very happy that this transpired from the introduction into this topic, because the first thing I really try to address is that what we are talking here is not safety of women and girls. And why I'm saying this is because the tragic events of attacks on women and girls brought this topic to life. The whole narrative in the UK for the first couple of years following 2021 have been about safety of women and girls. When I started looking into the topic, I really couldn't even understand, what do you define as safe? Because safety means different to different people. And also, safety, are we talking just about crime? What are the criminal activities? And is it harassment? Do you report harassment? All of the issues of women not being believed. And when it comes to actually sexual harassment, which I think what we're talking when we're talking about safety of women and girls, is often unreported because women are not believed. So there's no statistics actually that you're showing you the real picture of how women feel in public spaces. Equally, when you actually look at the statistics, man is more likely to be victim of crime, but again, woman unfortunately is a sole victim of sexual harassment. And I think we are then also going way beyond design and planning, and I think we need to be very cautious and very, very careful, because we really cannot design safe places. So that is one thing. And then the other thing, what I really didn't like, is that to me embraces this bias that women are just victim needing protection, which I disagree. We have the right to occupy the places. And also, if we switch our focus from safety to creating welcoming places, that would mean that you're equally feeling safe there. But it's a little bit more aspiration, it's a little bit more ambitious, it gets a little bit more creative, because equally there is a lot of work also going on thinking about just safety and their safety audits, and instantly everyone just gets very alarmed, very negative, and start thinking about CCTV cameras and fences and policing, which at the end in some instances can actually create the places that feel unsafe. What we are talking about here is gender equality, meaning women do have needs and rights to occupy the places, but also aspirations, and we want to empower them to be there, take an equal share of public spaces. What is that is needed beyond just protection and safety, which of course also I'm not denying it is a real issue and a very important one, but unfortunately design really can have little influence over human behavior. We perhaps need to frame the problem to look at, and the problem really is that our cities have been predominantly designed by and for those in position of authority. Traditionally that has been white able-bodied men with a capital, lacking really understanding and lived experiences of women and girls. And then of course we have the statistics, we talked about safety. We also have to look about more symbolic ways of underrepresentation of women and girls. Only 2 to 3% of statues across the world represent women. In London, there is a study that actually shows that there are more statues of animals than of known women. The total disregard of women's presence in the city is the problem. Framing that problem of, okay, we don't understand lived experiences of women and girls. The next thing is, what do you do to understand their lived experiences and their needs and aspirations and etc. So one of the first things that we did is that we went to engage with women and girls to essentially ask them and take that step back from assuming what the design solution should look like. And I think that was one of the most beautiful lessons learned and experience in working on this project, is that you first very quickly realize that really is not so much about very specific design solutions. I really wish it is as easy as setting a list of design principles, like you need to put lux level of this and the bench needs to be 3 meters away, or all of these things that we initially did play around. But what we realized is that every context is very different, every place is very different, every community has a different aspiration, and it's a very different thing. Very quickly we realized that there's absolutely no set of solutions that you can just apply. What became the basis of the solution is not so much design principles, but is engaging women and girls into every single decision, project. Obviously, It needs to be proportionate, so relevant decisions and relevant projects. And then building on those lived experiences to come up what the design solutions are. I will give a very simple example of how I learned this in a hard way. There was a brilliant research. There is a charity called Make Space for Girls in the UK. They started working on this topic a little bit before me, so I partner up with them very early on because they seemed like the only people who knew something more than I did in 2021. They've done quite a lot of research, specifically just engaging with teenage girls, so very narrow, very niche, but absolutely brilliant and very helpful to all of us. And I remember reading this one report where they said that they engaged with teenage girls, and that very group of teenage girls said that they really would love to have trampolines in that very space. Now, obviously, I extracted this as like girls like trampolines. Wow, amazing. This is what I'm going to write into the design guide. Just to say, the handbook originally was to be written as a design guide. With all of this excitement, I spoke with my colleague and I said, oh, teenage girls, they love trampolines. And she looked at me and she said, I was never allowed to play on a trampoline because she's from a Bangladeshi background where it is not appropriate for a girl in a skirt, because girls wear skirts, to jump on the trampoline. And this is the moment when I just dropped this idea of design guidance, stating any design principles, but essentially just saying, okay, who are we designing for? What is this space like? And the only thing we really can do is to bring the voices of women and girls into that design process. And that process needs to be fair, because then when I started doing that and I was like, okay, well, now let's engage with women and girls. We identify a couple of projects to test this idea. So very real projects, very real issues. We would create and map out who do we need to engage. We also really knew that intersectionality plays a huge role in how someone relates, feels in a public space. And that goes back to some girls are not allowed to jump on the trampoline. We really needed to ensure that the representation of those voices is diverse and is reflecting that very community. Instead of design principles, we started creating processes. And that felt way true to the topic, because gender inequality is a very complex topic. And I think it does require the systematic approach. A systematic approach means, and that is all reflected into the handbook, it means as an organization, you need to commit at a high up level to addressing gender inequalities. So before we go to engage with women and girls, we first need to commit to that being really important for the organization. Then going back from that, one is commitment. Another thing is, what are you committing to? What are the actions? Then moving from those actions, let's say local planning authority, as what I work for, we set the commitment as an organization. Then we did the research engaging women and girls. We identified what the specific issues in our areas are. And then based on that, we committed to actions. Sometimes we state a very bold actions, but if you don't have an agency to keep you accountable and scrutinize whether you're delivering against those actions, there is a risk that that might just stay as a nice, lovely words, but without actually anything that follows. So the next thing that we did is that we created this, we call it project board, but in the handbook I say you can call it many other ways, a steering group. Essentially bring the group of people who are passionate about this to hold you accountable to those actions and to start advancing this topic. It's not a new issue, but in relation to urban design and planning is still new, so we still have a lot to learn. So what you want to do is to have these people who are advancing the actions but also learning, because not everything that we've set in the handbook is 100% right. We did 3 years of research and I believe we need another 33 to truly understand what works and what doesn't before we can claim anything. And then moving on from having someone who actually scrutinizes and delivers those actions, then you need to have the policies. You need to mainstream this, which means that absolutely everyone working within that specific area needs to apply these principles. And again, going back to the principle is a very simple one: engaging and bringing voices of women and girls. Because the problem, for example, for us was that, of course, we can do a lot as an organization, but majority of the places that are being delivered and shaped do come from third-party developers. We don't build all of the homes. We are landowner, but majority of development comes from private developers. Now, how do you get them on board? Really, the only way, unfortunately, what motivates them, and the only thing that would mainstream, it's a good policy. It's if you set something that has to be executed. A good planning policy would require developers developer to engage women and girls. And also, what is beautiful when you set the policy is that the voices of women and girls become material consideration in planning process. In theory, you can reject and refuse development proposal if women and girls were not part of shaping that design, if what was designed essentially does not respond to their needs, aspirations, and wants. So I think this is where the beauty really lies in setting the processes, is because then it becomes mandatory for all of the decisions for all of the projects.
So I just want to do a quick definition of the word intersectionality, because not everybody knows that word. So if you wouldn't mind just describing what you mean by intersectionality.
That actually is a really good question. I've been having more and more conversation these days about definition of intersectionality. In essence, in a very simple term, it really just adds all of those other layers, including your age. So women and girls, we cannot see them or just about anyone as one homogeneous group. Age, education, social status, religion, these are all of the things that contribute to how one, in this instance, feels or relates to public spaces. So it's very different to, for example, saying a white middle-aged woman with full-time high-paid job that can pay for taxi if it feels uncomfortable in a certain situation, to someone who perhaps don't have those means to.
How do you get community engagement? Just because I'm actually wanted to know this for myself, because I try and reach out to people in the community and it's really hard to get anybody to respond. So how do you know you're getting a representative group and you're not just getting the white, well-educated, middle-class woman, and you're getting actually a much more diverse range of people?
We experimented a lot about that. Once we set the centerpiece of the handbook is really just a collection of good practice. But once we set the centerpiece of this whole principle of gender-informed urban design and planning being engagement, then we obviously knew that there are so many barriers to then executing that engagement in the proper way. We just spoke about intersectionality. So how do you really get that diverse representation? One of the first things that we learned is that it does take time, and that just needs to be factored into every project. One of the biggest issues that we saw is that this topic often comes too late in the process, and that's why I say having right policy would mean that you factor your resources in the right time of the project. And that usually means you will need more time to engage and to recruit participants. And we would take, for example, 2 months to reach out to community. Now, for the organization where I work with, because we are a regeneration agency as well, we are quite fortunate to have a very good connections with the local community. And we would take a month or two, if needed, to ensure that people who are responding, that we have the right representation. Now, the other very important thing is you need to pay people. They are experts. They will make your project decision much better. They know inside out about the area. So they're absolute experts in the field, and experts deserve to be paid. Another thing, particularly engaging with women and girls, is that one of the barriers to women engaging in the planning process is that women on average still earn less and they suffer from time poverty. Paying them to participation is the only really fair way. And it's a great incentive. This is where you start having a little bit more interest. The other really interesting thing, this is not something that I did. It's research that is currently undergoing in the UK by consultancy called We Made That, and I absolutely commend the work. They are looking into this topic. How can they use community researchers? So essentially, the researcher is not me anymore. I would hire a community member to be a researcher because the community member would know his community way better than I would. I've seen that working really, really beautifully. I had a lot of conversation with established community groups, and it really was an eye-opening, because then all of a sudden I'm not a stranger who is coming and trying to figure out who I should talk to. They already know, and they will do that for you. So you give them that power of engaging with their own community. The time of the year, the time of the day, all of these things need to be factored in if we really want to be inclusive. How inclusive our language is. I actually really enjoy a lot writing these ads for recruiting participants, because I really make it very personable, not professional, professional at all. It's just like me saying, hey, we really care about what you have to say, and this is what we're doing. Can we please get your expertise and try to, through language, incentivize people to participate? What is very important is to be very open and upfront about what is that you can do, what is in your remit, because people would often come with this idea of, hey, there's so many issues here, and I really want to tell you all of this. And of course, we listen, but I think the important is to build a trust and a long-term relationship. And another thing that is a little bit more difficult to do, I would also advise to not always recruit the same people. There is a tendency that you have your contact list of people who are very keen to engage. What I've noticed is that these people, they become experts, and the conversation from being like a very genuine, very open, very non-technical, after a couple of engagements, you start hearing them being almost knowing what to tell you, and particularly if participants are paid, then there is also, I feel like, that a little pressure to tell you the things that you want to know. And I feel like that loses a little bit of genuine conversation that might happen. Yeah, it does take time, it does take effort, but it is one of the most rewarding thing if done well.
Perhaps just step through one particular project from beginning to end, and what were the outcomes?
Just a little disclaimer, unfortunately, it does take time to deliver the projects, and it's usually a very long time frame. We really only started practicing this in 2023, so we don't have a project that has completed, but I will guide you a little bit through the processes. I do have one project which is a wonderful story and also quite a lot of lessons learned that I would be very eager to share, and it is about designing public places for teenagers. I'm sure we all know, whether from our teenagers, if we can remember that, or as a professionals, we are aware that teenagers are really overlooked in public spaces. So we place that as a commitment, designing with and for them. And before we started this project, we engaged with a group of youth. We're quite lucky to have already established a youth group who is really part of our organization in a way. They're the great experts and they engage with us on many projects and decisions. So we were really lucky that we already had access to them. So we thought, fantastic, we are going to co-design this space with them. We brought equal representations of boys and girls in the room, and together with them, we designed this design concept, produced that. And great, like we thought this is such a great example of how the things can be done. A couple of years later, when we got into this topic and we learned what we did, we went to revisit the design, and to our surprise or not, it was a gym, a basketball court, all of the things that are very often, in not 100% of the cases, colonizable by one group of users, and that usually are boys. What I think is even almost funny in the whole situation is that even those little illustration of people were simply just able-bodied boys. There was no girl playing on the basketball court or using the gym equipment. And I almost thought, would it be simple, almost like placing a girl or a disabled teenager into this place, be really out of order? Would you really wonder, how did you arrive here? What are you doing here? We then had to take a step back, and this is what is the first lesson learned, is that now we needed to find more money to revisit design. Applying gender-informed urban design principles would save you money because you won't have to retrofit, you won't have to redesign. If you do it right the first time, it will save you money. We were committed to correcting this, so we found more money to redesign this place. This time, we said, let's just work with teenage girls. So from that same group, we brought teenage girls back. We showed them design. Some of them who were participating in this co-designing could remember the design, and they were like, oh yeah, we know that's a watered and green teenage space for teenagers. But then we asked a different question. We said, but would you use this space? And they said no. And we were all confused. We were like, but why did you tell us to design this? And you were like, well, you asked us to design the place for teenagers. And this is the only thing that they know. The place for teenagers is gym equipment, football pitches, basketball courts. That's it. That for us was this, again, huge moment when we thought, let's start this again. Now we tried to co-design with them, but we soon realized that this group of girls, and generally women and girls, are conditioned not to think about their needs. There are simply no good examples out there. So more we tried to work out with them, like, what do you like? They wouldn't be able to point what they like because there's simply nothing. They would talk about some kind of a shopping mall. We go to shopping mall because we feel safe here, or there's this one bench. But there was like no one single place where they could say, hey, we really love this place, because there's no such a thing. So from there, we worked with mayoral design advocates. We were quite lucky again to be part of another research project which was looking into the topic and brought a little bit more resources in terms of expert advice. And we work with this wonderful mayoral design advocate. She helped us to create this participatory engagement method, which was not based on co-design, because that doesn't work when you're conditioned not to even know what a good design look for you, but to be co-client. So we took even a step back and we started asking the questions to girls. Okay, who do you want to be here with? What do you want to see around you? How do you want to feel in this place? What the materials should look like? All of these sensory things, and this digging a little bit more about like, okay, like give us the brief. So the beautiful things around that, and my colleagues worked very closely with teenage girls. We had over 10 sessions to actually then write the brief, the design brief, based on all of these needs and aspirations and wants from these group of teenage girls. What was really important for us is that we continue collaborating with them through the next project stages. So now they're clients, which they are. They're a client of this space. We help them to put their needs into a technical description as a project brief, but then we brought them in with us to select the architects, so through the procurement process, because as a client they were sitting with us and they were telling us, we believe that these architects, this architecture group can deliver our project brief. So they were essential part of also picking design team that can deliver. And this is where we are. We're now at the stage of design. What is really interesting, I don't lead specifically day to day that project, but a colleague that does, when she was recently presenting about design solutions, every single word she would say, well, teenage girls told us they want this and they really happy with this. Nothing that you can argue against, because it's actually such an evidence, it's such a beautiful process that you really don't have space apart from commenting on the technical elements, in sense of how sure we are that this color is going to withstand the time. Are we going to be able to manage this in the right way? And you then really get back into your role, which is just a technical advisor to people's needs. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward in a couple of years' time to see when this gets built, how it's going to be used.
What strikes me in what you're saying is that what your journey has been is to unlearn, go right back to the very, very beginning, get rid of all the assumptions, and then you had to go, well, now where do we begin? And you went down one path and this co-design model. Again, if you were with teenage boys, maybe actually what do they want? Maybe they do want basketball courts and stuff, but maybe they don't. But if you have them as the client, that changes the dynamic completely.
It shifts powers. It's giving our power to actual people who we're designing for. And I think that is the only way we can design successful places. Whether we're talking about gender equality or just about anything else, until that power is given back to people who we're designing for, I think we just won't progress to designing something that is equitable and that is good, that is sustainable. Because that's exactly what process we keep going through, is that we are adding our own biases. I mean, one of the things researching this topic that I started asking myself is, who wrote those theories? When were they written? What was that serving? What kind of society was that back in the days? But we're now just replicating all of these biases and replicating them in perpetuity without taking the moment to actually step back and say, can we take a different road? Can we start maybe by envisioning what the world we want to live in, and then start working backwards? Okay, how do we arrive to that?
We are in such a dynamic time in society. I think about the 60s was very revolutionary. We just threw out all the rule book and then we went, oh no, let's put some of that back. It was not until they threw out the rule book that you could go, well, what do we actually think is valuable to keep? In a way, you're describing the same kind of process where you're really questioning not only the power dynamic, you're questioning, who is this for? Is it for me as the designer? Is it for me representing the council? Or is it actually for them? In which case, how do we make it for them?
As a planning policy lead, I often sit at the pre-application meetings. So those are very, very initial meetings with developers. I really always get very frustrated when the first couple of slides, their design team would present and they would throw all of these fantastic words. Social cohesion, we're going to build community. It is for communities, for people. People will be healthy, they'll be happy, they'll come together, they will play, they will talk. And then the next slides would go about, and we did the assessment of the place, and here is the pipe, here is the tree, here is restriction on height. There's no understanding of people. And then you're standing there and thinking, wait, hold on a second. How are you going to create for community without understanding those very people? people. Have you ever sat down around that site on a bench and observe who is walking around? One of the things that I really would love to see more in urban design and planning is more social science. Can we work with anthropologists? Can we work with sociologists? And I brought the sociologist into this project. And this is where I started really learning how to listen to people, because it's really, in my view, urban design and planning really should be a job of anthropologist and a sociologist, understanding humans today. I mean, it's 2024. Can someone go and write us a brief what these people need? Because if we are designing for people, of course, we don't design buildings for the sake of brick and mortar and the building just to stand. We design every building for someone to occupy. Can we work with social science to give us a brief? The only our work I see ourselves is a technical advisor, like a technical person who then takes that and creates a solid design technical solution to that. Again, not just talking about gender equality, but about any issue that we are facing as a society. Urban design is just a part to play. But perhaps it is fair for us to take our share of responsibility.
I was talking with some people. It was actually about hospitals. How do you make the hospital work as a place? They just went, oh, what you're asking for is a clinical sociologist. What you're saying is we need, how do people use the space? And that's what a sociologist or an anthropologist will be able to look at. So a clinical sociologist, for lack of a better word.
I love that one. After leaning more towards experimenting and exploring and expanding who should be involved really in this process, I've recently organized a really interesting event where I brought futurists, because I actually wanted to play around this concept of, could we all together come to imagine this world of gender equality? Because how can we design something we cannot even imagine in our mind? So can we sit down and imagine the place where there is like a gender equality? How does it feel? How does it look? Who occupies the place? And then, as I said previously, can we maybe be a little bit more ambitious and creative? And then we work backwards. Okay, now how do we arrive to this? And I think the beautiful thing is when you open up and break this siloed approach, where the only people who are replicating the processes are same old architects, urban designers, planners. We are very all skilled, and I respect my industry and my colleagues. Should we have all of these skills? Perhaps not. I don't think you reasonably can understand the society and understand dynamics and predict the future, but we can work together.
I actually went to a talk last week at a conference about transport. They had somebody, how do you break this cycle? She cited some resource, Future Science for the UK government. I'll put it up on the show notes. So before we close out, any closing thoughts or remarks or ideas, anything you would like to share?
Maybe just call for action to all of the listeners, regardless of profession, whether you're working or not, you are a citizen, so you do have right to question, would be to question the status quo, to actually turn around themselves and ask the question, is this working for me? Because if it's not, something has to be done with it. I think that's one of the biggest issue for me, just being a woman, is that we're so conditioned not to think about our needs to the point that we just shrink our lives around the things that are not designed for us. And again, I'm not just towards women and girls, it's just about anyone else. We need to start questioning why it is like that and what can we individually do to change that. What this work has been about. It is just admitting that the things don't work and trying proactively and positively to look for a solution.
I have very much enjoyed the conversation. I've learnt so much. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.